The dry hollow station was cloaked in red dust as the train screeched to a halt. Takina, a tall Apache woman, stepped off the platform carrying an old suitcase in her hand. In her heart, a fragile hope still flickered, that after this long journey, a home and a husband would be waiting for her. But the man who came to meet her, Caleb Morton, a young merchant, showed no warmth at all. He glanced at Takina's figure, tall, broad-shouldered, solid muscles pressing against the fabric of her simple dress. Caleb let out a bitter laugh, his voice cutting through the crowd. "I thought I was marrying a refined lady. Turns out, I got a woman built like a man. No one could ever call that a wife." His words tore through Takina's dream like a knife. Townsfolk murmured among themselves, some laughed out loud, and a child pointed and shouted. The giant woman, Takina, stood frozen, her hands trembling as they clenched the handle of her suitcase. Tears welled up, but she forced herself to lift her chin, even though her heart was breaking. Caleb turned his back and walked away, leaving Takina slumped on the wooden bench at the station. Surrounded by mocking laughter and contemptuous stares, she curled into herself, abandoned and adrift like someone cast out by the entire world. Only the desert wind howled through the dust, swirling around an Apache woman left behind, clutching her suitcase in silence, with nothing left but humiliation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dry hollow station as the sound of mocking laughter still lingered in the air. Takina sat in silence, her broad shoulders trembling now and then. The old suitcase rested by her feet. And suddenly, the entire world seemed to shrink into a dusty corner of the wooden platform. Amid the noisy crowd, one man stood quietly watching. Elias Ward, a middle-aged rancher, wore a weathered leather coat, his gray eyes cold and his face worn with the marks of a hard life. He had lost his wife many years ago and had lived alone ever since, on a patch of barren land west of town. Elias was not one to meddle in others' affairs, but something about the sight of the abandoned Apache woman, her proud eyes trying to mask her shame, kept him from walking away. Without saying much, Elias stepped forward. The crowd fell silent at once. Everyone recognized the rancher who kept to himself, yet was respected for his quiet resolve and the steady hand always on his gun. He stopped in front of Takina. She looked up, her tear-filled black eyes sharp with suspicion, like a cornered animal ready to strike. Elias offered no comfort, asked no questions. His voice was raspy and low, just 3 words. "Come with me." Takina froze for a moment. A storm of questions surged through her mind. Was this man trying to take advantage of her? Was it just another trap? But when she met Elias's gaze, all she saw was the stillness of stone. No mockery, no pity. He bent down, lifted her heavy suitcase with one hand, then turned and walked away. Slow, but certain. After a few seconds, Takina rose and followed. She had nowhere else to go. The road out of town was choked with dust, and the wind lashed sand across their faces. Elias rode his horse, while Takina walked beside him, her bare feet bloodied, but her posture unyielding. Neither said a word. There was only the creak of the saddle and the heavy footsteps of a woman too large for the world around her, eyes burning with a silent longing for a place to belong. By the time darkness fell, they reached a small ranch house nestled deep in the open prairie. The wooden cabin was humble, its fence leaning, the barn quiet. Elias opened the door and gestured. "There is room for you in here. If you want to leave, do it in the morning. But if you stay, live like a human being." Takina paused at the threshold. Inside her, doubt and hope collided fiercely. That night, when she stepped into the first room in years that had a roof of her own, she knew her life had just taken a different turn. On her first morning at the ranch, Takina woke to the sound of roosters crowing mixed with the howling wind across the prairie. Pale light filtered through the cracks in the door, revealing the scars etched along her strong arms. The night before, she had slept on a hard wooden bed, beneath a patchwork blanket that was worn but clean, carrying the scent of sunlight. For the first time in so long, her sleep had not been haunted by cold or fear. In the kitchen, Elias had been up for hours. He tended the fire, smoke curling through the small window frame. Without a word of greeting, he pushed a simple bowl of bean soup toward her, then returned to slicing cured meat. Takina sat down and ate quietly, her black eyes stealing glances at this solitary man. He was weathered and silent, but in all his movements, there was not a trace of contempt. The day passed slowly. Elias led the horse out to the field, while Takina, without being asked, picked up a broom and began sweeping the floor, straightening the chairs, patching the curtain by the window. Her rough hands were clumsy, but every motion was filled with determination, a quiet plea to prove she was not useless. By afternoon, Elias returned with a bundle of firewood. Takina stepped outside to help, her bare feet pressing into the cracked, dry earth. He started to brush her off, but when he caught the resolve in her eyes, he silently set the bundle down. Together they carried it inside, without a word, only the sound of labored breaths mingling with the wind sweeping through the grasslands. Night fell, and they sat across from each other at the dinner table. The dim oil lamp cast a golden light on Elias's sun-worn face and the sharp lines of Takina's cheekbones. The silence was heavy, stretching between them. At last, it was Takina who broke it. "Did you bring me here, out of pity?" Elias looked up, his steel-gray eyes catching the glow in the dark. His voice was calm. "No, I just did not want to watch them treat you that way." The answer stunned her. After so many years of being seen as a burden, no one had ever spoken to her as if she were simply a human being. That night, as she lay down, a strange sense of hope welled up inside her. She thought of a dream long buried, a home, a man strong enough to stand beside her, a child who would one day call her mother. Things that had once felt impossibly distant now flickered like a faint light within this old wooden house. Outside, the wind howled long into the night, but within Takina's heart, for the first time, there was a fragile and precious sliver of peace. Rumors spread fast in Dry Hollow. The oversized Apache woman had been taken in by Elias Ward at his ranch. Some scoffed, others whispered, claiming the lonely old rancher had lost his mind. But in the shadowy corner of the saloon, Emery Granger, the man who once wrote to claim her as a wife, ground his teeth. Publicly humiliated in front of the entire town, he could not stand the thought of Takina, his bride on paper, finding peace in someone else's home. A week later, Emery returned to the station with a thug named Jeb Mullen, a brute with hands like mallets and a face carved in scars. Jeb was infamous in the region. Wherever he went, bloodshed followed. Emery knew better than to face Elias on his own, so he hid behind the shadow of violence. That afternoon, Elias and Takina came into town to buy salt, nails, and a few seed packets. The air on Main Street tightened like a drawn bowstring the moment they appeared. Conversations died mid-sentence. Fingers pointed. Takina walked beside Elias, towering above most in the crowd. Her coal-black eyes remained steady, but her hand clutched the hem of her dress a little too tightly. Suddenly, Jeb stepped into their path. His voice grated like gravel. "This woman belongs to my boss. Hand her over and walk away." Elias stopped, gently setting the sack of seeds on the ground. His gray eyes scanned Jeb before settling on Emery, lurking just behind the hired gun. His voice was calm, but it rang clear through the silent street. "She does not belong to anyone, and she has chosen to be with me." The crowd held its breath. For a second, silence froze everything. Then Jeb sneered, one massive hand resting on the grip of the pistol hanging at his side. Takina stood behind Elias, her heart pounding, but in her eyes sparked something new for the first time. A man was standing in front of her, not to shame her, but to shield her. The air was thick with imagined gunpowder. The slightest twitch could set it all off. Elias shifted half a step forward, his right hand hovering near the Colt at his hip. In the fierce red light of the setting sun, his lean frame seemed forged from steel, like the whole prairie had gone still with him. At last, it was Emery who blinked. Fear won out. He pulled Jeb back and muttered, "Not here. Not now." They retreated, but Emery's eyes burned with hatred. As Elias and Takina left the town behind, the whispers resumed. Some nodded in respect, others shook their heads in scorn. But inside Takina, only one thing echoed. He stood up for me in front of everyone. That night, back at the ranch, Takina sat by the fire and spoke. For the first time, her voice did not tremble. It was steady and deep, like the beat of a drum. "If you will have me, I will stay. I am not going anywhere. Thank you for being here." If this story stirred something in you, a memory of dusty evenings, and the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your chest, consider subscribing to my channel, so that every day we can sit together once more, and I will tell you another story of the West. After the tense afternoon in Dry Hollow, Elias's ranch became a rare haven of peace. Takina tied her hair back, her strong hands gradually growing familiar with mending fences, splitting firewood, even leading the cattle out to pasture. Elias was a man of few words, but every morning, when he saw the tall woman walking steadily beside him, the emptiness that had long gnawed at his soul seemed a little lighter. One time, Elias noticed Takina's arm was still swollen from an old fall. Quietly, he soaked medicinal herbs and applied them to the bruise. Takina winced but did not push him away. Her deep black eyes met his not just with caution now, but with something else: gratitude. That night, by the fire, Takina spoke slowly, in halting English. "In my tribe, I was the one they scorned, the one they left behind. But here, I feel warmth." Elias did not answer. He simply added another log to the stove, letting the glow flicker across his sun-worn, wrinkled face. Then he gave a small nod. To him, home had ceased to exist the day fever took his wife and child. But now, maybe he did not want to live in that house alone anymore. Meanwhile, over in the Dry Hollow saloon, Emery Granger drowned his frustration in whiskey. The shame of that day still cut like a blade. He ranted to Jeb Mullen, voice slurring with drink. "He stole that woman from me, right in front of the whole damn town. If I don't take her back, what kind of man am I?" Jeb sneered, flashing a broken-toothed grin. "Then let us wipe him out. One old rancher and one oversized woman? Me and a couple of the boys can handle that." The plan took shape right there at the bar. One night, while Elias was out checking the pasture, Jeb and his men would ambush him and force Takina to return as Emery's property. Back at the ranch, Elias and Takina remained unaware of the storm brewing. They spent their quiet days building a new roof for the grain shed. When Elias handed her a hammer, Takina let out a soft laugh, a sound so unfamiliar it startled even her. Laughter had never been part of a life shaped by rejection. At night, Elias sat on the porch, smoking his pipe, while Takina sat nearby sharpening a blade, her tall figure silent in the lamplight. In that silence, something burned low and steady, a fragile trust slowly kindling into warmth. But down at the far end of the valley, Jeb's wagon wheels had begun to turn, carrying whiskey, gunpowder, and hatred. Darkness no longer meant the quiet of night, it now held the promise of a storm drawing near. A crescent moon hung low in the Arizona sky, casting a silver glow across the silent prairie. Wind whistled through the wooden fence, soft as a whisper in the dark. Elias stood on the porch, his Winchester resting against the doorframe. The old dog let out a low, growling bark, its hackles raised. Elias knew something was coming. Inside, Takina fed another log into the stove. Smoke curled into the air as firelight danced across her muscular, bare shoulders. Her hand froze mid-sharpening. She had heard the dog. Her black eyes gleamed with alertness, the instincts of a warrior never truly fade. Then came the heavy thud beyond the fence line, the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding dry earth. Then more. Then many. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, his voice hoarse. "They are here." Before he could say more, the window shattered with a crash. A bullet slammed into the ceiling beam. Takina lunged and grabbed the short-barreled carbine Elias always kept by the stove. Shadows moved across the yard, Jeb Mullen and 3 others, guns glinting under the moonlight. Jeb roared, his voice wild and feral. "Hand the woman over, or both of you die tonight." Elias answered with a thunderous gunshot, the bullet tearing up dirt right at Jeb's feet. Gunfire exploded in reply. Windows shattered. Firelight caught shards of glass flying through the air. Takina did not flinch. She dropped to one knee, the carbine stock pressed firm to her shoulder, and fired twice. One man screamed, tumbling from his saddle with a thud. Elias covered her, cold-eyed and precise, moving like a man who had fought in wars long past. Jeb charged forward, axe in hand. Takina hurled her knife, the blade slammed into the fence post, inches from his face. He stumbled, then roared, swinging the axe down hard on the fence. Steel flashed in the firelight. Elias pulled Takina back inside and shoved a heavy table against the door. "They are not coming through this threshold," Elias said, voice like stone. Takina looked at him, her eyes fierce and warm at once. For the first time in her life, she was not fighting alone. Outside, Jeb and his men howled, hurling torches onto the thatched roof. Flames burst into the night, lighting their snarling faces. But inside the small house, A weathered rancher and a cast-out warrior stood side by side, weapons ready, hearts beating as one. That night, the wind carried smoke, gunfire echoed with battle cries, and above it all the fire-forged will to survive, and a new kind of faith being born from blood and flame. Flames roared as the thatched roof was devoured, ashes swirling into the night wind. Cattle in the barn wailed in panic, terrified by the gunfire and the crimson blaze. Elias backed into a corner, reloading his Winchester, eyes locked through the narrow crack of the door. Outside, Jeb Mullen was circling around with the rest of his men, aiming to break into the barn and burn everything to the ground. "They are trying to burn the whole damn place," Elias muttered, voice gravelly. Takina stood beside him, sweat and soot streaking her bronze-toned face. One leg still ached from an old wound, but her black eyes burned bright like live embers. She gripped the carbine tightly, then set it down. With her other hand, she drew the long Apache knife always strapped at her hip. "I will hold him off," she said. Elias shook his head, but before he could stop her, Takina had burst through the side door like a gust of wind. It swung wide open, and her towering figure appeared in the firelight, stopping the men in their tracks. Jeb growled, dropping his axe and drawing a pistol, but Takina was already on him, one hand, like an iron clamp knocking the barrel aside, the knife in her other hand slicing close to his throat. Jeb shoved hard. The two bodies collided and crashed to the ground in a brutal grapple. The others raised their weapons, but Elias fired from the window. One dropped instantly. The rest ducked behind the wagon, too shaken to press forward. On the dry earth, Takina and Jeb wrestled like wild beasts. He was strong, but she was stronger, her thick arms locked around his neck, even as he swung his axe downward. Blood trickled from a gash in her shoulder, but she roared the sound of someone who would never submit. Jeb bellowed and hurled her off with all his strength. They tumbled down the slope just behind the fence, kicking up dirt and sparks as firelight bathed the scene. He grabbed her hair, trying to pin her down, but Takina fought back, her hand finding the handle of his axe. A heartbeat later, the blade sliced across Jeb's arm, and blood sprayed crimson into the night. He screamed, reeling. Takina rose, her powerful body arching like a bronze statue, black eyes blazing with fury. With a cry that echoed through the entire valley, she drove him to the ground and pressed her blade to his throat. "You will never lay a hand on me again," she growled through clenched teeth. Jeb gasped, blood seeping into the earth. When Elias arrived, smoke still rising from his Winchester, he saw her Takina, tall and unmoving in the flickering fire and ash, knife trembling slightly in her grip, but her gaze unwavering. Elias placed a steady hand on her shoulder. His voice was firm and low. "That is enough. Tonight, we are still alive. That is victory." Ash floated into the air, like a curtain falling on a battle written in flame and fury. The dry hollow valley lay in quiet stillness after days of storm and fire. Emery Granger vanished from the land, unable to show his face again after such a humiliating defeat. The thug Jeb, bloodied and broken, also fled, leaving behind only ash, gunpowder, and the memory of a night that lit the sky red. The ghost that once haunted Takina and Elias had finally faded away. The ranch, though scorched at the roof and scarred by bullet holes, still stood tall, and within that damage, a new home was being built. Takina cleared the ashes, her strong arms lifting heavy beams Elias could not carry alone. He chopped wood, she raised the fence. They worked not just as partners but as companions. No need for many words, just shared glances and movements that fit like clockwork. That evening, as the cattle returned slowly from pasture, Takina sat on the porch. On her sun-darkened face, lined with old scars, her black eyes held a strange, peaceful light. She placed one broad hand on her belly and whispered, "I never thought I would live to call any place home." Elias stood beside her, silent for a long time, then wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It was not a gesture of impulse, it was a life's decision. In the red light of sunset washing over the fields, he was no longer a lonely rancher, and she was no longer a castaway. They were two broken souls who had found each other mended by choice. The townsfolk still gossiped. They still called her cruel names, but Elias paid them no mind. He walked with her through the market, held her hand in the middle of the street. The way he stood beside her quieted every mocking laugh, and soon, they no longer saw the woman who was too large. They saw a strong wife walking beside her husband. A month later, The doctor from Prescott came to check on Takina's old wounds and smiled as he delivered the news. She was pregnant. The words lit a fire of joy inside the small wooden house. Elias sat quietly on the steps for a long while, eyes on the open fields, pipe smoke curling in the air. The pain of losing his wife and child slowly faded, replaced now by the image of a child yet to be born. On the final night of summer, beneath the wooden porch, Takina rested her head on Elias's shoulder. Together, they watched the starlit sky in silence. Out there on the prairie, they were no longer lone survivors. They were a family. And my friends, in the harsh land of the West, no one chooses where they are born, but they can choose who they live with. A home, even built from charred timber, stands stronger than any fortress when it is held together by love and trust. That is family, the greatest treasure a person can have. Thank you, all of you. I truly wish that wherever life takes you, peace and joy follow. I love you, my dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Let me know what you thought about this story. Drop a comment below. Press 1 if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe.